Well, welcome into the Traditionalists. I'm Kevin Davis, and I'm joined by Nicholas Wansbutter, who is a lawyer from the great state. No, country. It's still a country for now. For now, it's still a country of Canada. And Nicholas is going to tell us a little bit about what on earth is going on in Canada. I hear all sorts of things and see all sorts of headlines, and I don't understand any of it. And so, hopefully, Nicholas can help us through that a little bit. And he's going to give us his thoughts as well on what he thinks of the direction of his country. And perhaps we'll talk a little bit about America or Germany as well. We chatted a little bit yesterday, and certainly a lot of things going on in the world to chat about. And as Nicholas said, he's more of a melancholic. I am more of a sanguine. So we'll see the views that might be a little bit different, which will make hopefully for an interesting show. So Nicholas, thank you very much for joining. And I guess I don't wherever you want to begin.
All
What's
right.
up with
Well, you're
Canada?
welcome. And thanks for having me. I like talking about politics. It's all, from my melancholic perspective, it's all pretty dark and depressing, but it's still interesting nevertheless. So, what's going on in Canada? Your viewers probably know the big news is that our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, on Monday, the Feast of the Epiphany, announced that he's going to eventually resign. So all the headlines say Prime Minister resigns, but he actually hasn't actually resigned yet. He's still the Prime Minister, and he will be until the Liberal Party, which is the Liberal Party of Canada, that's the party that he's the leader of, he's going to remain Prime Minister until they select a new leader, and then that new leader will become Prime Minister. So I've said to a lot of people, your celebrations may be a bit premature because he's still in charge. And what he's done is he's prorogued Parliament. So what does that mean? Proroguing means that Parliament's essentially been suspended. It hasn't been dissolved. So that means that the Prime Minister and all his cabinet ministers retain their positions. They retain all their rights and obligations and authority. But the Parliament won't be meeting until March the 24th at the earliest. So that means that we have this interesting situation where Canada's really not functioning the way it would normally function according to its constitution right now, because we're just going to have government most likely by order in council, which is a lot of viewers, especially from the United States, might be familiar with executive orders. Orders in council are essentially the Canadian version of executive orders, and that's the only way they can govern when there's no parliament sitting. Nothing is going to be debated, nothing is going to be voted on. Now, granted, they don't have unlimited power on what they can pass by way of order in council, but the point is, until the end of March, there won't be any debate. There won't be any holding of the government's feet to the fire on various things that are going on. Everything's just kind of paused. Now, on the good side, maybe quasi-good side, is that it also means all the laws that they currently have before Parliament that are up for debate and they've been voting on, those are all dead now. They're going to have to start all over again when the next session of Parliament starts. Because essentially what prorogation is it's ending of the session of Parliament, but the Parliament itself is still sitting. So this Parliament is the 44th Parliament for Canada since 1867. This is the 44th government that's been formed. And we were in the first session of that. That first session is now ended. So is everything that was still being worked on. And then they'll be starting a second session. I imagine at the end of March. There's a lot of different things that could happen. If the Liberal Party selects a new leader fairly quickly, that new leader may just say, you know what, we're calling an election. They could do that. They could trigger that sooner than March the 24th. But I think the main thing here is that Trudeau doesn't want a situation where there's an election coming up in 60 days and his party's scrambling to find a new leader. That's why he prorogued Parliament, because there was going to be a confidence vote on Tuesday. And all signs were indicating that the new Democratic Party, which really, they're essentially Canada's Communist Party. I mean, they don't call themselves the Communist Party, but they're not exactly communists, I suppose. I mean, they're very socialist anyway. They're Canada's most left-leaning party, other than the actual Communist Party. So they've been propping up the Liberal Party of Canada, which used to be a centrist party, but under Trudeau has become a far-left party. In some ways, they've outmaneuvered the NDP to the left. So they've had this weird coalition, but not a coalition, where the NDP's just been keeping the minority Liberal government afloat, and then recently they finally said, no, we're not going to do this anymore for whatever. I don't know all the machinations. I know the members of the party are probably very upset with their leader that he has been keeping this very unpopular prime minister afloat for all this time. And some people
yep. Sorry, real quickly, you say he's a very unpopular prime minister, and that's something I've really wondered. I mean, because obviously what I view, say, Twitter or whatever, I see, okay, yeah, Trudeau is bad, but I kind of sometimes think that maybe that's just an echo chamber. I mean, is he just generally disliked then?
Yeah, I mean, Twitter and that is an echo chamber, so you're right to be cautious of that. But as with any leader, when you have really bad inflation, they're going to wear that. So I think he is legitimately unpopular right now. All the mainstream media, I mean, if the mainstream media or the legacy media, I mean, they've been all but worshiping the ground that this man walks on for the last 10 years. And they've been doing everything to shield him and protect him and pump his tires as much as they can. So the fact that they're even admitting that he's incredibly unpopular and should step down tells me, like, they wouldn't say that if it wasn't true. I guess let me put it that way. So I think most people, my view is that most people, their only real loyalty is to their wallet. And Canadians are being clobbered in their wallets and have been for the last at least year and a half or more. I mean, groceries, just basic things like that. Groceries and homes have more than doubled in price in the last 18 months. And
18 months.
Canada,
oh, yeah. Wow.
So, I mean, Canada being, this huge empty country, we should not have housing problems. But I mean, it's easier, it's more realistic that you could own a home in many places of Europe now than you could ever own a home in Canada based on the prices versus people's income. And that's because with mass immigration, they've increased Canada's population from 38 million coming out of COVID. I mean, it was before COVID, but then there was no immigration for about 2 years there. 38 million, we're up over 42 million now.
Wow.
So that's like more than a 10% increase. So, I mean, that's why housing prices have gone through the roof, among other things. But, all those people come here, they need houses too, right? And no one built any, no one's built any 6 million houses or 4 million houses.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? It's like they had such a great plan with this whole immigration. It's the same in Europe, right? Of course, it's like let's just let them all in. Let's be charitable and be nice, and no plan to do anything.
Yeah.
And it was, and not for the immigrants either. That's also part of what kind of shocks me. And they do give them freebies, but they didn't have there was no plan. There was no plan to assimilate them into society, which was never going to work for anybody.
No, not at all.
No.
I mean, Canada's economy, I think, is a big shell game, and mass immigration has become a central part of that, because now you can exploit all this cheap labor, which, I mean, that's the thing. They couch it in terms of, oh, look how charitable we are and how nice we are. We're going to let these people from these terrible countries come and live in Canada. But I think what they're really doing is ensuring that their buddies have a good source of cheap labor. Now, they've also done a lot of subsidization of foreign labor. So I think there's seems to be more to it than just exploiting cheap labor. There's also like an aspect of, I think it's inescapable to say that there's a definite plan to change Canada's culture and replace the people who've been living here, because they're heavily subsidizing employers to employ immigrants instead of Canadian citizens. So there's a lot of subsidies there and various, although the real big money is for refugees. Them they house in hotels with 3 meals a day of room service, working out to over 80,000 Canadian that gets paid for their room per refugee claimant per year. Wow. Meanwhile, Canada has an out of control homelessness crisis. I mean, any major city in Canada now, if you go, where to look, you'll find these huge homeless encampments. I just drove past one last week in Kitchener, which is a city near me. It's about a population of about 500,000 people between Kitchener and Waterloo, which are two cities that have essentially grown into each other. And I drove past a homeless encampment. It must have had hundreds of people. in it. Like there were at least 100 tenths in there, and this is in Canada where it's, I mean, right today it's about minus 10 Celsius and
Oh,
snowing.
wow. That's so. I mean, I guess that kind of, and there's a lot of questions. I'm going to have you on sometime again to talk about what Parliament is. I understand it fairly well because I've been in Germany, so I understand that type of government a little bit better. But I think most of the American listeners are like, "What are you even talking about?" Well, but I think we'll have to say that for another show because I think that
Yeah.
requires a bit more of a deep dive.
Well, I mean, I think I could just very quickly say for American viewers, I mean, there isn't a huge difference between the House of Commons and the House of Representatives. I mean, they're
Hmm.
somewhat similar, and then both systems have a Senate. So the Senate's the Senate. And then, I mean, we just call it a parliament instead of a Congress.
But your
But
elections are different though, because you have obviously you have, like you said, you have the parties that help support each other and whatnot. Obviously, that's different than in the U.S.
well, yes, that's different just because we don't quite have the same grip by the two parties.
Mm.
The other big difference, of course, though, is in the United States being a republic, they have a president who, and Germany, what is it, the chancellor gets elected separately as the head of state. The big difference is since Canada is a
Right.
constitutional monarchy, our head of state is King Charles. Uh, but
Got it.
because, you know, on paper, he's the head of state, but in reality, the prime minister, who would be, I guess, whatever Nancy Pelosi's position is, like that would be roughly the equivalent of prime minister in the United States, like the person who's the leader of the party with the most seats in the House of Commons or the
Hmm.
House of Representatives in the US. But then he ends up being both the leader of the government and, for all intents and purposes, the executive as well, because everything is done on the advice of the prime minister, which means he tells the governor general, who's the king's representative, what to do, and they do it. So he's essentially the head of state as well as the head of government, which I think is problematic. I mean, it's certainly for people who claim to really believe in democracy. I think it should be a bit problematic. I don't believe in democracy. I think democracy and republics are a terrible form of government, and I think history proves that. Because look, they haven't even been around that long, and look how much blood has been shed, and how much turmoil there is in our countries, and the level of corruption in that, and especially the way governments tend to spiral out of control in size.
But
Versus,
you mean
you had
you don't
monarchies.
trust the masses to make the right decision? I mean, come on, let's. Yeah. No, it's a good point. It's an interesting, and it is, and I'm glad you bring that up because even though I am more sanguine than you, I agree. I think it's a strange thing. That's not even that strange. I guess we're taught in school really that the democracy is this enlightened idea, and
Mhm.
truly, I think they'd probably even say enlightened government, and it's just show me how. Yeah, tell me where this enlightened government has worked before, and it just doesn't. And I think that's it's an interesting thing. So I mean, we're going a little bit off topic, but I mean, if can the king just come in and say you're all gone? I'm going to do whatever I want here. And is that theoretically possible?
It is. I mean, the king does have the power under the Constitution to technically he could just dissolve Parliament because
Hmm.
all parliaments sit at, like, the House of Commons sits at the pleasure of the king. Like that's, I'm just looking up the so the Constitution, Section 38, which I've open on my screen here, says the Governor General, who's of course representing the King, shall from time to time, in the King's name, by instrument under the Great Seal of Canada, summon and call together the House of Commons, which by inference they can dissolve it. And that's how Parliament gets dissolved. If the
Hmm.
Prime Minister ever wants to call an early election, what they do is they go to the Governor General and say, I'm recommending that you dissolve Parliament. And then I don't know if the governor, and then I don't know if the governor general actually goes to the king and say, "Hey, they're recommending you dissolve the Canadian Parliament," uh, and then it gets rubber stamped, or whether the governor general just rubber stamps it then and there without actually speaking to the
Hmm.
king. I mean, according to the Constitution, technically, they would have to speak to the king, and the king would have to give the direction, but. Let's say in practice, everything is just whatever the prime minister says. That's what the governor general does.
Interesting. And so when is the next scheduled election then?
November 2025 would be the
Uh huh.
next one required by the Constitution because the Parliament will have sat for the maximum amount of time that it can by November. But at this point, the election could be any time, because I think one big difference maybe between the American system and a parliamentary system is that the government has to maintain the confidence. Now, when I guess this never comes up in the United States because there's only two parties, so whichever, like, one party is going to have more than 50% of the seats, so you'd never have this situation where you have a ruling government that actually doesn't have more than 50% of the seats in the House of Representatives. That's just could never happen in the United States. But in Canada, we have significantly more than two parties, and in terms of parties with actual seats in the House of Commons, so the Liberals have the most, but not a majority. Then the Conservative Party of Canada have the second most. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they're actually fairly close to the Liberals, but again, not enough to form a government. Then you've got the New Democratic Party. They've got a handful, but enough seats if you combine theirs with the Liberal Party. They have that 50% plus one to get laws passed. But then you also have the Bloc Québécois, which is a regional interest group. I mean, they're a separatist party from the province of Quebec. So they only run candidates in Quebec. And their whole platform is, we want Quebec to separate from Canada. So in practice, what they end up doing is just blackmailing. If it's a minority government, they end up just blackmailing the government of, hey, you give a bunch of stuff to Quebec, and then we'll vote with you on this or that. And then the Green Party, which by their name you can probably guess what they're all about. They have 2 seats in our parliament. So you've got right there 5 parties that actually have seats. So you've got a sprinkling of independents. I think there's 2 or 3 members of our parliament who got kicked out of the Liberal Party, so now they quit and they're just sitting as independents. They'll probably join someone by the next time there's an election. Although there are there's a couple ridings that seem to have independent members of parliament fairly regularly. It's unusual because independents are never going to form a government, and people in Canada they want to vote for a horse that might actually have a chance at governing, which is why Canada's more Conservative Party, the People's Party of Canada, there's always this battle. They never get enough votes to win any seats, because everyone's always saying, well, we have to vote for the Conservative Party because they actually have a chance of forming government. The People's Party doesn't. So, I mean, if we had proportional representation, the People's Party would have about 30 seats in our parliament, because they get about 10% of the popular vote, but they never get enough, because you need the way it works, since we don't have proportional representation, we have what they call first past the post. Whoever gets the most votes in any given riding, they win the seat in that riding. So if you had a riding, I mean, Canada's divided into, I probably should have had this up before we started, but I 330 some seats. I'll have to look that up for the exact number. But if you had a riding where 33% voted for the Conservatives, 25% voted for the People's Party of Canada, 20% voted for other, etc., the Conservatives would win that seat. So, the People's Party, they'd look like, hey, they actually got some decent number of votes. But, okay, it's 337 members that are in our parliament, or the House of Commons, anyway.
Interesting. And so the People's Party. So who is? I keep seeing a name of someone who they keep saying is going to be this big conservative Trump type leader of Canada. I forget his name. It was a very French name, so that's probably why I keep forgetting it.
Well, there's two. The leader of the Conservative Party of Canada is Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah.
And then the leader of the People's Party of Canada is also French. She's Maxime Bernier. But Poilievre is probably the one you've heard of, because since he's the leader of the Conservative Party, it looks like he'll most likely be the next Prime Minister of Canada, because the polling is showing almost no support. I mean, the Liberals have dropped down to third place in terms of popularity. The Conservatives are surging because most people they'll go back, and most Canadians will go back and forth between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. I mean, notionally, the Liberals are the left of center party and the Conservatives are the right of center party. But as I say, the Conservative Party the Liberal Party under Trudeau made a huge shift to the left, like by Canadian standards, of course. I mean, from a Catholic standard, all these parties are flaming leftists, but from within the context of Canada. But, so Pierre Poilievre, he's the leader of the Conservative Party. I frankly don't understand all the Trump comparisons. I mean, even the Trump comparisons are made by people who like him and those who don't like him. So I know, like my dad, who's he's my father. I love him, but definitely a baby boomer, definitely a product of that time period. He really doesn't like Pierre Poilievre. I always like Trump, and I'm like, I don't see it. To me, the man looks and sounds like Milhouse from The Simpsons, which never really watched that show, but it's such a. I've never watched an episode of that show, but it's just ubiquitous. The whole, all the cultural influence that it has. That these characters. He just seems like kind of this economics nerd kind of guy, and I guess the comparison to Trump is he'll occasionally be a little bit more confrontational than Canadian politics generally is. Canadian politics is generally very staid and gentlemanly and polite and civil.
So not like American.
Right. So I guess he's delved a little bit into that more confrontational and maybe giving people nicknames. I haven't, I haven't watched enough of his stuff to be able to say, but I guess that's where the comparison is. But I mean, to me, well, Pierre Poilievre, he's not Justin Trudeau, so I guess that's a point in his favor. But aside from that, the Conservative Party of Canada, they've always been the speed limit traveling Liberals. So the way elections always go in Canada, and this has been my whole life, and you look back, it's been the same, is the Liberals will be in power for 10 to 15 years. They'll destroy the country as much as they can during those 10 to 15 years, move everything in a leftward direction, wreck the economy, and then people get upset, and then they'll elect the Conservatives. And then the Conservatives will be in power for between 4 and 8 years. They'll inherit a terrible situation. They'll kind of fix the economy, but they won't undo anything that the Liberals did. So, for example, in the 60s, the Liberals legalized divorce. Well, I mean, the Conservatives sure didn't outlaw it when they came into power. In the 80s, abortion became legal. Well, again, when the Conservatives came in, they didn't do anything about that. Firearms laws in the 90s is when they were brought in. When the Conservatives came in again in the early 2000s, they kind of nibbled around the edges a little bit. They did away with this firearms registry that everyone hated, but they didn't really undo anything. They sure didn't touch gay marriage, which also became... well, gay marriage, quote unquote, of course, we know that that's not actually marriage from a Catholic perspective, obviously. But, so these things, they're not saviors. The Conservative Party of Canada, I think what we can count on is the economy will stabilize somewhat. I mean, it's terrible right now. And of course, our legacy media is always saying, no, don't believe your lying eyes. The economy is actually really good. Stop whining. But everyone knows it's terrible because when you can't even afford groceries and people's full-time jobs are living in their cars, they're homeless encampments, the economy is not good.
Well, you got to wonder real quick. Sorry, you got to wonder when is the media going to actually? Okay, we do have to kind of tone it down. It's like with Biden. Yeah, Joe Biden he's super sharp. He is right on it. Really smart. He's just as sharp as he ever was. It's like, guys, we see. We can watch him, right? We can watch him try to talk. It's bizarre. Eventually, it's like as you say. I mean, people can go to the store and actually see that it's more expensive. So it's a bizarre lie that it's like eventually you think they'd learned it. Okay, yeah, we can only go so far, but seemingly not.
Yeah, it seemed, I don't know if they almost can't stop themselves, because it seemed to me like before COVID, legacy media was on its last legs. No one believed it anymore. No one watched it anymore. And then when COVID-19 was like a massive gift for them, because then all of a sudden everyone started watching the news again because they want to see what's going on with this. And for some reason, everyone reverted to accepting everything the media said is gospel truth here in Canada. But now it's kind of going back down again. So I don't know what all goes on with all that stuff. There's lots of different theories that people have. I'm just looking at what we can see on the face of it. I'm not exactly sure what their plans are, because you would think whoever is funding the media, and I think we know who some of the people are because they're pretty open about it, you'd think they would want them to tone it down a bit, and so that people wouldn't completely lose their trust in it. But
well, and it's kind of a segue into another topic, which I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think of Elon Musk and Twitter? Because I think it's an interesting topic, because if you think of again legacy media, and I'm not an Elon Musk fan. I'll get your opinion first before I talk about I might give mine, but I guess the question being, is Twitter kind of the or X, is it the wave of the future? Is that type of media going to replace the legacy media? And if it does, is that a good thing? Do you think that means that people are going to see more truth, or is it going to lead to actual change in politics?
Well, it does seem that is probably the future, because for years now that's been where things have been trending, where people seem to be going for their news. At the end of the day, just to answer your last question, things aren't going to get better until people return to the one true faith. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what everything can be boiled down to. And the best you can hope for in the circumstances we have of completely atheistic, anti-Catholic governments everywhere, is the best you can ever get is band-aid solutions to what's a surgery problem. And that surgery problem is the wholesale abandonment of the faith after Vatican II. And not just among the people who remain. I mean, the Novus Ordo itself, obviously, that's it. As far as I'm concerned, it's a completely apostate sect. I wouldn't even call it heretical. I mean, some of the stuff they say, like there is no Catholic God. I mean, that's essentially saying there's no God.
Yeah,
for my money. So you're an apostate if you're saying there's no God.
Sure.
Willingly or not, God will judge every person on how culpable they are in adhering to the Novus Ordo. But even if they're inculpable, the fact is, they're not practicing the Catholic faith, and so everything is going to fall apart. Because even the non-Catholics, when there's the papacy and the Catholic Church, that's always going to be a standard that then the Protestants and everyone else, like, well, we can only go so far, because then people, like, if we go too far, any one of our people who are still kind of basically decent people, they're going to say, hey, wait a minute, the Catholics are still holding the line, so I'm going to go over there. So Vatican II didn't just wipe out all the Catholic countries, it wiped out everyone else too, and it just opened the floodgates to everyone. It could just go and do whatever they want, which unfortunately fallen human nature being the way it is, doing whatever they want is not good.
Well, it's an interesting thing when you see Vladimir Putin. He's a big baddie, of course, in the world, the worst. Pretty much Hitler. And I'm not saying he's a good guy. I think he is kind of a probably ruthless, evil dictator. But it's interesting that he is still, writing an open letter and saying, hey, if you like tradition, come to us. And I just think that's really interesting, because I think again, I'm not saying he's a good guy or whatever, but it's an interesting thought that he understands that the best people he could bring into Russia are people who are searching for traditions, for truth, for kind of some of the old ways, if you will, rather than, hey, let's bring over a bunch of 25-year-old Muslim men and put them in our hotels. It just shows you the Western world is just like, yeah. I suppose someone said one time on the podcast, sin makes you stupid, and it's like, well, maybe that's what it is.
Probably could be. I mean, does sanctifying grace necessarily make people smart? I mean, I guess it'd give them some wisdom and some proper direction. And I think most importantly, the humility to actually listen to our superiors. I mean, this might be a very unpopular position, but based on my life experience and study of history, I think unfortunately the vast majority of people are really just meant to be humble farmers and just followers, right? Farmers, monks, just. But in our democratic liberal age, fraternity, liberty, equality, no, everyone's smart, everyone's equal, everyone should be everyone should be a leader, not just a farmer. When there's absolutely nothing wrong with admitting that some people are smarter than others, some people are more geared towards leadership than others, and I think that a Catholic monarchical system recognizes that.
Yeah. And I think it asks a very good question. Who should vote? And I think that's something that, again, we're taught our whole lives, at least in America. I don't know what the voting age is there, but I mean, you turn 18 and then you're allowed to vote, and you should, and everyone should. But then, a couple of years ago, I started to really, really consider that and really think about it. And that, okay, look at also what did America do at its founding? And it was the voting members were landowners, male landowners. And it's like, nowadays, if you say that, people would, they would put you in prison almost. But then you really start to think about it. It's like, okay, why? Why was that the case? And it's a really interesting thought process. Go down that rabbit hole of why was it male landowners, and not everyone would agree with my conclusions, but it's a very interesting thought.
Yeah, well, I think at the beginning they had people who, to use an Americanism, had skin in the game, being the ones who were voting.
Right. Exactly.
Because they're the ones who are going to be the most impacted by the changes in laws. But the problem is any system based upon voting seems like it will eventually degenerate into what we have, where just more and more people get the vote. I mean, and it happened in ancient Rome and ancient Greece too, right? Where enough people start getting the vote, and then they realize, hey, I can vote myself a share of other people's wealth, and that's the beginning of the end. And it seems like it takes about the same amount of time every time around, like a few hundred years, and then next thing you know, you've got an actual dictator running things, be it a Julius Caesar or whoever else. I mean, we've seen other liberal democracies that have fallen in the past, and then they get replaced by people who are definitely not democratic at all.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting thought, and I think it's a good point. I think that everyone should study their history. You will see how empires rise and fall, and I think you definitely see. I guess right now we don't have any necessarily individual empires falling. Maybe Great Britain, maybe England. That seems to be
the United States.
In the United States, yeah.
Empire. I think the United States
fair enough.
would meet all the definitions of an empire. I mean,
I guess I see it as the whole Western world, I suppose, collapsing at the same time.
Yeah, but the reason it's all kind of collapsing at the same time is because the United States is the imperial power. I mean, they have military bases in 80 countries. I mean, that's an imperial power, and they project their imperial strength by these wars. I mean, they just do these wars to make the world safe for democracy, which they've been doing since World War I, to impose their will upon the world. But that empire is in decline, so that's why everything's going down, because all the vassal states of the empire, which is, in my view, everyone in NATO, are essentially vassal states of the United States.
Interesting.
I mean, and just by virtue of the United States, how massive their economy is, the way they go, they're going to drag everyone down with them, because most countries their economies are very intertwined with the United States.
Well, interesting. Well, I guess you got to go here fairly soon, so I'm going to ask you then, what do you think of Donald Trump? I think we probably talked about this last time, but it's been a while. So what are your thoughts? They can be long, short, nuanced, whatever you want.
Well, I think he's a very a friend of mine uses the term an imperfect vessel. He's very imperfect. I think his personal life is disgusting. I mean, with all the simulated marriages and adultery and all that. But who isn't like that now? Really? I mean, among our politicians, if we're honest, I don't think he's that exceptional. It's very public. He's not the savior that many people think he is.
No.
I mean, he's probably better than the alternative. I think we can say that.
Probably. Yeah, definitely.
But so I mean, but that's all I can say. Yeah, he's better than the alternative, but you know, not who I'd choose if I was the one
Yeah.
who got to actually select things.
But do you think
I
he can
think
save
he's a lot.
a sinking ship or no? Postpone a sinking ship, let's say
I
that.
think he can postpone it. As I say,
Yeah.
all these things are just band-aid solutions. The only thing that
Sure.
could really save the sinking ship would be a wholesale return to the one true faith. Well, I mean,
Sure.
return. The United States never embraced the one true faith,
Sure.
and in fact persecuted it for much of its history. It's always been a Puritan empire. People forget about that because everything's all nice and friendly and kumbaya and strawberry fields forever right now, but it wasn't always that way. I mean, Trump, I also think he's really good at self-aggrandizement and he talks a good game, but I look at what he did during his first term. He did very little of what he said he was. Now
Yeah.
everyone has a million excuses for him,
Sure. Yeah.
which I just find it interesting how Trump is held to no standard at all, whereas everyone else
Yeah.
is held to a standard. I mean, if we held Trump to the same standard that we held liberal politicians, saying that he had bad advisors is not an excuse. He's the president of the United States. The buck stops with him. He chooses his advisors. People try to explain away and excuse Operation Warp Speed. There is no excuse for Operation Warp Speed, as far as I'm concerned. And he had good advisors who he didn't keep, such as Dr. Alexander. I forget his first name, but he was on Trump's team. He was initially later removed, and he has given interviews and speeches saying that he told Trump, "Don't do this. This is going to be bad." Wow. So, Trump, he'll probably do a few good things, but at best, as I say, I think it's just band-aid solutions. But maybe he'll clean up the border a bit, and the economy will probably get better. But I think in Donald Trump and Elon Musk, Israel has much more ardent and militaristic supporters. So, it makes me a little nervous about what's going to happen in the Middle East.
It's a good point. It's one of those weird things that we've covered for the last few years, and there's very strange stuff going on in Israel. Look at the little details of what happens, and it definitely seems like they are certainly expanding, certainly trying to grab power, but other things that make you wonder a little bit, make you question what exactly their plan is. And well, if you look at some of the prophecies or whatever you want to call them, it would kind of point to us heading in a certain direction. Let's just say that. But either way, it is definitely interesting. And in either way, this vast support by American conservatives for Zionism, open Zionism, is strange, and it's not good. It's definitely a negative. So again, I feel bad. I feel like I'm agreeing with you on all the negative aspects of what we're talking about. But I think you're right, and I think in the end, I think Trump will do. I totally agree. I think he'll do a few good things. He'll not do a lot of what he said. He'll probably, hope maybe he'll get a couple more judges, which would be good. I think that has been good, not great.
That's
compared to the alternative would have
been the best.
nightmare.
Yeah, the appointment of judges is probably the best thing that he did in his first term, with the exception of Amy Coney Barrett. The judges that he selected have been pretty decent. I mean, again, in the context of what they have to work with.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not from if we wanted to go fully, all Catholic style, and I mean, which is right to do from a certain perspective, right? In principle, you could say from a Catholic perspective,
sure,
not all their decisions are right, but on the practical order, just knowing that this is the reality on the ground, it's probably the best that could be hoped for realistically in the circumstances.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. I guess, I mean, that's to wrap up a show like this. I think it's probably the best to remind everyone to continue to pray for your countries, pray for the leaders. I mean, really, you remember that if you pray the Litany of the Saints, that we pray for the princes and the powers of our nations. And we don't have princes. I suppose you do, which is nice. And I think it is another thing that to remember that they do have the power over many people, and we should pray that they use that for good, even though, yeah, we're pretty sure they won't, but prayer
Right.
doesn't hurt.
And I think we need to fervently pray for the restoration of the papacy as well, because
Absolutely.
without a reigning pope, I don't think you can actually have proper Catholic rulers, because you need someone who's going to, you know, be able to rule on matters of faith and morals and give that direction that that we don't have without a pope.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I lost you there for a second, but no, you're absolutely right that we have to have, yeah, we have to have a pope. Too many things to pray for. Everyone, go turn off this podcast and go get on your knees. That's I think what we need to do. Nicholas, it's been really enjoyable. I really appreciate you coming on. It did actually help me to understand the Canadian issues a little bit more. I would love to have you back on sometime in the future. If we ever have any issues about law or anything, that'd be great. You also have your own YouTube channel. If you want to shout that out, I can share it on the screen though. I don't know if I'll share the link in this video as well. If
Yeah,
someone
sure.
wants to just search it, how do they find it?
Well, if you just search for "Don't Talk TV," so you can see after the
Mhm.
@ symbol, that's what it's called. It's called "Don't Talk TV," as in don't talk to the police, because it's a very law specific. My main focus of it is explaining to people in Canada their rights,
Mhm.
especially the right to silence, which is incredibly important. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting, legal topics that I talk
Cool.
about there. There's definitely lots of interesting legal topics to talk about from a Catholic perspective. So I'd be happy to be back on, since that is more of, it's just a law-based show that happens to have a Catholic
Mhm.
lawyer who runs it. So I don't have the opportunity to delve specifically into Catholic things too often.
Sure. No, we'd love to have you back. Definitely always good to talk to someone who knows his business, and you weren't too pessimistic. You were just on the verge of it. So we always appreciate that. Again, Nicholas, I really appreciate it. Everyone go check out his own channel over there, especially if you're interested in law. And Nicholas, until next time, God bless you, and God bless our countries.